we're spending more, and it looks like there's no end in sight to that. So the U.S. government got bigger, but our taxes didn't increase. So that means we're borrowing more and more and more and more. And we can't do that forever. That's generated a lot of uncertainty, because uncertainty for lots of people. So uncertainty for the Federal Reserve, because they don't know how long they're going to have to be managing this bigger and bigger debt. The yuan is depreciated as a consequence of that. That's not because anything the Chinese government did, or it's partly what the U.S. government did. And the Chinese authorities, they're doing things on a day-to-day basis. The Chinese central bank is very sophisticated. They have very smart, technically very smart people, very good economists, statisticians.
Hello, Professor Sargent. Thanks for joining us. It's my great honor to have you here.
Thank you. So it's nice to be here.
Mm-hmm. So let's begin with global economy. As we are at the end of 2023, would you like to go over global economy in 2023 first?
Well, it's been quite a year. When I think of big developments for the world economy, I guess I think of three. One is, it was around this time last year that China opened up to allow people like me who are friends to come back and see my friends in China. So, the first half of 2023, that was going on, and that had big ramifications not only for China but for the rest of the world. So that's a big thing, a positive development. The second thing is some developments in the United States. I think there's a couple kinds of developments. There's superficial developments that, inflation went up in the United States in 2022 and early 2023. If inflation goes up, interest rates are going to go up because of the way bondholders price things. You could say that the Fed raised interest rates, or you could say the Fed had to raise interest rates. But they both happened. So that's been going on. But that reflects a more, the inflation and interest rate changes are consequences of deeper things. There's kind of two kinds of effects on inflation. One is definitely temporary, and that was because of COVID and governments' responses to it. Governments all over the world, and I'm thinking that my government, caused lots of supply chain disruptions. And that increased a bunch of costs and changed relative prices, and that had consequences for inflation. But that was temporary. And, those things have mostly been worked out. But then the other thing, which might be more permanent, is that my own country, the fiscal authority, meaning the taxes and expenditures, my country, a friend and I had done some research. My country responded to COVID. Lots of Americans were withdrawn from the labor force. They were essentially paid by the government not to produce things, activities, but from the government's fiscal policy, the government increased expenditures, but did not increase taxes. So we issued lots of debt, huge amounts. And then there's a pattern that the United States hasn't figured out yet. After COVID left, our expenditures came down somewhat, but not all the way to where they were. And after every previous war, big war we had an expansion in the size of the government, a permanent expansion. So after World War I, the federal government got bigger. After World War II, it got bigger. And it not only spent more, but it taxed more. So here's the situation in the United States today. We're spending more, and it looks like there's no end in sight to that. So the U.S. government got bigger, but our taxes didn't increase. So that means we're borrowing more and more and more and more. And we can't do that forever. That's generated a lot of uncertainty because uncertainty for lots of people. So uncertainty for the Federal Reserve, because they don't know how long they're going to have to be managing this bigger and bigger debt. And it's, if you kind of go underneath the announcements, the Fed doesn't just set interest rates. It's been doing lots of other things, very unusual things during COVID. It's taken on a lot more risk. It's kind of gotten into a bank insurance company now. It took a lot of risk that the banks faced because of the interest rates onto its own balance sheet. And that has lots of consequences, and it has not been worked out. So my answer is, on the monetary fiscal side, from the United States, there's lots of uncertainties. There's much more uncertainties than there was before COVID because of the way our governments responded to COVID. So that's one thing. But then there's a whole other kind of thing in the United States, and that is, which is concerning to me and to many other economists, during the Trump and Biden administrations, they agree on a lot of things. So they agree on basically pursuing a trade war, tariffs and subsidies. And that was something that the United States, before Trump and Biden, the United States recommended that other countries not do. If you go back, 10 years ago, we were in favor of globalization. We were in favor of lots of trade. Why? Because it made lots of Americans better off, as well as making other people better off. So that's been a change, and that's a headwind for the whole economy, and I mean for the world economy, because it puts other countries in a situation where they retaliate, and the whole trading system gets diminished. So that's a concern. And then there's a whole third set of things, which I think concerns everybody: wars in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East, and that situation has gotten, the businessmen don't like wars, and one reason is it's very hard to predict how they're going to turn out or what happens. Anyway, so that generates economic uncertainty.
To combat the inflation, the Fed became hawkish in 2023. Do you think the Fed made the right decision?
So here's the way I think about it. In many ways, the way to think about the Fed is not just 1 year or 2 years at a time. In lots of ways, if you look back at the 50 years, and try to figure out what the Fed's doing. We actually kind of use some machine learning on it, if you think about it, statistic. They tend to have rules, and they operate in the same way. That it's an institution that has certain ways of doing things. When inflation takes off, they're going to raise interest rates, and whether hawkish, they're doing it. That's kind of what the whole institution tells them to do that. There's a whole bunch of things. I think what they've kind of done is pretty much on track. So now that kind of that changes your orientation. You kind of ask, well, when did they do something? Did they deviate from that? And maybe they did a little bit at the beginning of COVID. And if you kind of ask why, they thought it was kind of a new situation. They hadn't been, in their lifetimes, they hadn't been through, a big surge like that, and they didn't know what to do. So they maybe deviated from that. That's the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm. How did the hawkish Fed affect global economy and the financial market?
Well, if U.S. interest rates go up, you could say capital investors are short-term, money market managers. They're moving money across countries really regularly. And they like higher interest rates. So if U.S. interest rates go out, it puts pressure on other countries to raise their interest rates. So it's natural. Now you could say, but some of that pressure came from the U.S., but some of it came from inside their own countries. Like in Europe was under some of the same pressures. China's a different story. For various reasons, China didn't have the same inflationary pressure. Now, it's an interesting thing to ask why. They didn't do what the U.S. did during COVID to their fiscal policy. So for a scientist, it's a really interesting experiment. But nevertheless, that put pressure on China, and yuan is depreciated as a consequence of that. That's not because anything the Chinese government did, or it's partly what the U.S. government did. And the Chinese authorities, they're doing things on a day-to-day basis. The Chinese central bank is very sophisticated. They have technically very smart people, very good economists, statisticians, and but they understand their constraints, and the world economy constrains them, and influences what they do, I think.
Okay. Let's move to China. You have visited China for many times. So how do you think about the development of China's innovation?
I'm a complete outsider, so you know more than I do because you live here. But I think about basics, about what are the strengths of China. As an economist, so I think about the fundamentals, like what created Shenzhen, which didn't exist, which is a city I visit, which basically didn't exist. And now it's a modern, there's no U.S. city like Shenzhen. And how beautiful and modern it is, and clean, and the way things work. And that came 40 years ago, when I was older than you, didn't exist. So what created it? And what's present in China for the future? Okay, so the first thing is China produces large numbers of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, basic science, engineering, math, biology, physics, chemistry. You look at the numbers who graduate, and then you look at the number in the pipeline. It's compared to the United States, it's many more, okay? And they're good. They're world class. You can measure that by kind of publications, and not just patents, but publications and leading. So that's the foundation. Second thing is manufacturing. If you go to a Chinese I had the privilege of going to one this summer. It just blew me away. Just how it was engineered, the robotics, the mixture of advanced technology. They had beautiful engineering, the organization, who was doing the work, and how it was produced by engineers, all in-house, both in general infrastructure for science and then proven engineering ability. Engineers are problem solvers, and China has lots of them, okay? And then another element, which was with this manufacturing plant, entrepreneurship. I've known this since I was a kid, because when I was growing up in San Francisco, I knew Chinese kids, Chinese Americans. They're from here. Their grandparents or parents were from here as immigrants who came, to the United States they immigrated. They were uneducated, but they were entrepreneurial, and they became successful. And I knew them in college. And I saw a characteristic of entrepreneurship. And when I come here, I see entrepreneurs all over the place. They have ideas. They're creative at all sorts of levels. I mean, you could see someone from a village who has an idea how to start a little. So entrepreneurship and taking risks, that's there. So you combine that with science, the fundamentals are there. So that's something. So you asked me, So in terms of like this is the way an economist thinks, because economies go up and down. So there'll be a bad year, a good year. That's kind of hard to figure out. It's kind of hard to predict. But as long as you let entrepreneurship and have you need a government to have to rules and things are stable. But as long as you have a fair playing field and the fundamentals are just good. Are there problems? Yeah, but there's problems in the U.S. There's demographic problems. There's going to be more and more people my age and fewer your age. That means there's going to have to be some adjustments. And but that's true in many countries, and so that's kind of the challenge. But the positive thing is China has great economists and political scientists who kind of they know how alternative ways to confront that problem in ways that are constructive. So I look at the fundamentals, and then the final thing is, so those are all kind of economic fundamentals. So there's another fundamental which is which I put a lot of weight on, and this is just a casual observation, but China has a long history and culture of valuing scholarship and education. It goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years, with the honor that scholars and bureaucrats, to be in the Chinese government, you had to pass tests and so on. And I even see that, you can tell that's different from my country, which doesn't hold scholars in such esteem. But I think that's a valuing learning, and then kids value, their parents valuing education. That's something that's present in China, and it's not present as much in my country. And so that's a fundamental that I wish my country had. So anyway, lots of positive things.
Mm-hmm. What role will innovation play in reshaping globalization and the international order?
Everything.
Everything?
Yeah.
Would you like to say more? Explain more?
Well, not everything. It would be a very positive thing. So if you just look at it's innovation and then how people respond to it. Because, so this is an interesting thing with society. Every time there's an innovation, there's people that want to stop it. That's where kind of tariffs and subsidies come into. Innovations tend to, that's why the beautiful, that's the insightful and creative destruction. Innovations are creative, but they in order to be creative, there's some new idea. There's a new way to do something. That means we're going to start doing it in this new way and stop doing it in the old way. And there are plenty of people who are doing it in the old way. So guess what? Those people are going to want to stop it. And they're going to, I don't care what kind of government you have, they're going to go to the government and say, we have to stop it. That's as old as the Industrial Revolution. It was going on in Britain. So when I said it's everything, it's the force, but you need a society, a social arrangements that can foster innovation. Mm-hmm. This is true in my country. You could see a struggle. Mm-hmm. I know much more about my own country than I do about China but differences interest me.
Mm-hmm. How will new technologies like AI change the future dynamics of economic growth? Do you believe machines' judgment?
Oh, it's never the machine. Uh-huh. It's always the person running the machine. So when you say machine learning, it's a very good sales pitch, but if you actually look and do it, there's a very smart person that's telling the machine what to do. Of course, the person that couldn't have done it without the machine, it does a bunch of calculations. But the person conceptualized the calculations that he or she couldn't do. A beautiful example of that is AlphaGo, which beat the best Go player. But if you look at all the thought, the very clever thought that went into teaching the machine how to do it, it's beautiful. I think about things simple. I think economic growth, it's created by people doing things. And one thing is how you measure economic growth. Is it that we just have more of what we used to have? Or is it we have better versions of the same things we had before? Or is it we have new things? We have things we never thought of. So like you consume a lot of things that for most of my life it didn't exist. I wouldn't imagine it. Like your cell phone. And then various things you do on the cell phone that I don't do, like social media and stuff. So those are completely new things. And now the question is, how do we value them and how do we measure them? That's actually very hard. Because, there's people who try to think about this. In many ways, you or I'm kind of an average citizen. I live better off than the King of England lived, 100 years ago. If you kind of look at, consider, well, cell phone, various health things. He didn't have penicillin. If I go to the dentist, various things, and that doesn't show up in the growth statistics as much. So, I think there's people all over the world trying to think about how to measure things. But it's a good question. So there's some activities that we've been doing a long time that because of kind of we're hardwired to be something and do something, but like there's ways we can learn better. Like my friends and I, like you can watch videos online if you want that'll teach you all sorts of things for free. It's kind of, I study these things. There's many more than I have time. And no one's charging. That's not measured, anyway, but it's an innovation. Makes me better off. Gives me joy,